Okay. So is it live in the Discord as well? Okay.
It is indeed. They can hear you in the Discord, and we are streaming live on YouTube.
Well, fantastic. So, hello everybody. Hope you're all doing well. Let's pray. O heavenly King, comfort of the Spirit of truth, who art everywhere present, and fill us all things, treasure of blessings, and giver of life, come and abide in us, cleanse us from every impurity, and save our souls, O good one. Amen. So, I hope everybody's doing well, and I hope you will find this interesting tonight. What I'm thinking to discuss tonight is the whole is the essential discipline of maintaining inner peace, and this I think is one of the ways in which we probably best live out the Orthodox life, live out and manifest and live out the virtues that we're striving to attain to. Of course, to get there, we need to go through this whole process of repentance. We need to purify ourselves of all of the passions. We need to purify ourselves of all of the things that we often so dearly hold on to as the things that we identify ourselves by, and especially if we have a sense of being a victim. We define ourselves. If we define ourselves by that victimhood, then we build up a whole little world all around that. Of the passions, and it's a false ego, it's a false self, and ultimately it will crash, and it will lead to great unhappiness. Very often we spend our lives indulging our passions, and I'm not just talking about the fleshly passions. I'm talking about some of the intellectual passions, some of the passions of the rational part of the soul, in particular, anger, resentment, bitterness. And I've talked a lot about this. But for example, if we allow ourselves to get upset, if we allow ourselves to rage, if we allow ourselves to just let out our rage and start cursing and swearing and wanting to kill somebody and all of this stuff, and much less hitting the wall or throwing things or acting out, this means that we have a very serious problem. And this is because this kind of behavior is not only profoundly childish, because it's like a 3-year-old throwing a temper tantrum, with a little more developed vocabulary, but it's something absolutely, completely contrary to any kind of Christian spirituality. And it doesn't matter what the subject is. It doesn't matter for what reason we're angry. The scripture, it says, "Be angry, but sin not." Obviously, the Lord showed that he got angry and could get angry, but in his anger, he did not sin. So also, we can be angry but not sin. Anger was given to us, the fathers tell us, for one reason, and that's to fight against the demons. The only acceptable target of our anger, really, for Christians, is the demons. It's even important in the gospel to remember that we're told our fight is not against flesh and blood. In other words, it's not about other people, but rather it's about the spiritual powers of darkness. And in other words, it's against the demons. Now, sometimes people are manipulated by demons. Sometimes we ourselves find ourselves being manipulated by demons. But the real source of the trials, the temptations, and all of these things that ultimately um, uh, create that kind of reaction of anger within us. Um, it all has a spiritual root, and it's not a divine and angelic root. It's a demonic root. Um, and so, but it can also be rooted in other parts of our personality. Um, a lot of times we get angry because we're hurt. In fact, most of anger is what hurt develops into, and that's that's just a kind of the, shall we say, natural progression of something that can be unnatural. Um, uh, we get hurt because our ego is offended. We get hurt because we feel like our, something in our construct of reality has not been observed, or there's something wrong is going on, and so we become defensive, and we start acting out to protect our ego. Well, what is our ego? It's that concept that we have created, which is how we interact with the world and how we want people to interact with us. But the more that we allow that ego to dominate our consciousness, and the more that we live according to that ego, the less we're living according to God. As Orthodox Christians, the ideal is to live in a calm and peaceful way in sobriety. Sobriety is not just the absence of substances. Sobriety is about, it's an entire way of being in which we have complete custody of our mind. And that maintaining custody of our mind, but not only of our mind, our emotions, our reactions, our feelings, which doesn't mean that we don't feel things, that we don't have emotions. It's not about being flat. It's about being in control, so that we do not allow ourselves to react in a way that's going to create other kinds of consequences for us. This is really, I believe, a very important thing. When we grow into greater and greater custody of our mind, when we grow into a greater and greater mastery of ourselves, anything can happen. Anything. And we do not need to react. We do not need to react emotionally. We don't need to react rationally. We don't need to react other than to observe that something has happened, and then we can, in a rational way, respond. If somebody comes up and to us and and cusses us out and says all sorts of things about whether they have any basis in truth or not, doesn't matter. You basically want to punch his lights out, right? You want to get back at him. You want to react, but the more that we can control ourselves, the less reaction there would be. maybe our initial reaction would be to try and punch him out and shut him up. But the more control that we have, maybe instead of acting on it, instead of actually punching the guy, you would just turn around and walk away. Or you might just ignore what he's saying and just keep on doing what you're doing. It's very possible to do this, to learn to not react, to learn to have that, to maintain that, that stillness, which is not simply an outward stillness, but it's an inward stillness. If somebody is really deeply insulting you and all of that, and disrespecting you, and it's not about, one doesn't have to respond. You can simply let it go. It doesn't have to disturb your external peace, and it doesn't have to disturb your internal peace. You can let it go not only on an external level, you can let it go on an internal level and not be upset by it. The same thing goes for other situations in life, because there are plenty of things in life that we're unable to control, and this is a really important aspect of this. Say somebody that you love is sick. Say somebody that is that you know or love is diagnosed with a fatal illness. How are you going to respond to that? And really, what is the proper Christian response? Certainly compassion, certainly love, certainly extending that that love and compassion and support to the person who is suffering. But to become wrapped up emotionally in their suffering actually does not help. And furthermore, if we start injecting our own worries and fears and all of these all of these other things that these emotions that run through our mind, and and put us into a state of anxiety and a state of being completely upset, it just makes them feel all the worse, because not only are they feeling bad physically, but here they see that people around them that they care about are so wrapped up in it that they themselves are suffering, maybe even more than the person who's got this disease. Another example could be, say, that you are diagnosed with some kind of dangerous or fatal disease. 30 years ago, I had cancer of the tongue. I had a third of my tongue cut out. Still couldn't shut me up. And all sorts of, and lymph nodes and other stuff. And I was a new priest. I'd been a priest for a year and a half. And I didn't know if I was going to be able to ever speak again. And so, I understand what it is, not only to face the pain and the uncertainty and all of these other things, but also to face all the emotional and psychological reactions to that kind of a situation. What's the best way to react? With patience, with calm, with trust in God, and with surrender to the presence of God, and surrender to the will of God, knowing that whatever his will is, that it may be done. Not my will be done, but thy will be done. And when we can do that, we can really begin to endure anything. We read about the lives of the martyrs and their sufferings, the tremendous suffering, the tremendous pain, the tremendous ascetic feats that they underwent for the sake of Christ in order to present themselves as offerings, as it were, before God. Letting the pagans, or the communists, more recently, do whatever they were going to do. And they courageously endured whatever it was. With that faith, with that focus, that confidence, that awareness of the presence of God, who is there accompanying them in their suffering. And it's all about this accompaniment in suffering, much more so than it is about God taking away suffering. Jesus did not come to take away our suffering. Jesus came to take on our suffering and to enable us to continue in that, even with suffering, without losing faith, without losing hope. That perseverance in a spirit of peace, in a spirit of patience, a spirit of acceptance, and of surrender to God, will get us much further than if we completely stress ourselves out, which in reality would only contribute to whatever disease it is that we may be suffering from. But when it comes to other kinds of suffering, other kinds of struggle, say it's not a physical thing. It's some kind of a relational problem. How do we allow ourselves to react? Do we allow ourselves to react in a way that makes the problem worse? Do we allow ourselves to complicate things? Do we push ourselves into places that really are none of our business, where it's not our relationship that ultimately is being threatened, but somebody else's? In all of these things, if we can maintain inner peace, if we can maintain the remembrance of God and the focus on his presence and on his will, that we might be doers of his will, that we might hear his will and do it, that we don't let ourselves be pulled this way and that by our emotions and by our feelings, but rather can remain calm and collected and available. What we can do is we can bring peace into any situation. It's so easy to get pulled when people are people are raging off, for whatever reason, when people are angry, when people are hurt, to get pulled onto their side, and it's not necessary. And in reality, it's not helpful. The greatest thing we can do is to manifest that spirit of peace. Saint Seraphim of Sarov was one of the greatest of the Russian elders of the 19th century, said, "Acquire the spirit of peace, and 10,000 people around you will be saved." And that spirit of peace is, to acquire the spirit of peace means that we acquire the awareness of God, the constant awareness of God, the constant unbroken focus on God, in which we don't let anything distract us from that. So there can be any kind of storm raging around us, whether it's somebody's anger or somebody's hurt or somebody's um, uh, whatever it is. That if we can maintain that spirit of peace, we can be part of the solution, and we can be part of the healing rather than part of the problem. So all these times that we allow ourselves to get upset, to get anxious, to get um, angry, to rage, we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing? What are we doing? And realize that when I do this, I am not in control of myself. How do we get control of ourselves? First and foremost, the best thing is the practice of the Jesus prayer. When you're saying the Jesus prayer, and if you're trying to focus on the Jesus prayer, there's not a whole lot else that you can be doing at that point. You can say the Jesus prayer while you're doing other things. But if you're trying to focus on the Jesus prayer and really pray it, what it requires a context of peace, where you're not going to be distracted. You don't have the TV on, you don't have the computer on, you don't have your personal device on, you don't have YouTube, you don't have WhatsApp, you don't have whatever it is. And you certainly don't have a bunch of politicians going. But to say the Jesus prayer in the spirit of peace means that you strive to exclude any distractions. Put the telephone in the other room and turn it off. Make sure that you can't hear noise in the background, but just focus on Christ. And let his peace descend within you. It'll start in your mind, it'll go down to your heart, and then it will suffuse throughout your entire body. Ideally, if we can maintain this, the world would be a much better place. And it's not hard. It's not rocket science. It takes perseverance, and it takes the desire to have Christ, to have that living experience and relationship with Christ. And in this way, we can begin to live in that peace. which is really I think the way that a Christian should be able to comport himself, without all sorts of disturbance. Now, some people unfortunately have various kinds of anxieties, and it's hard to go there. But my guess is that uh, if you really focus on the prayer, if you really focus on um, the discipline of not reacting, the anxiety will recede, and you can simply be present to God, and God will be present to you. Now, there's another aspect of this which I also want to bring up, which I think is very important, and this is especially a big temptation um, uh, for new converts in the faith, for young men especially, for bright young men who have studied theology and have studied philosophy, and uh, that is to become a zealot. Um, Here we find orthodoxy. We find this great treasure, this great pearl, and we want to make sure that we conform ourselves completely to it. And so we read libraries full of books. We get to know everything we can about it. We learn all the canons, and then we decide that our priest is maybe not being quite as observant as he should, that maybe the services aren't quite as long as they should be, that maybe everybody's not fasting as hard as they should be. They're certainly not fasting as well as I'm fasting, because, of course, I become the criterion of orthodoxy, um, and we get involved in in this um, very sad game of comparison of ourselves to other people, who usually are the ones who uh, end up with the short end of the stick, um, and then we begin uh, to criticize and to judge and to condemn um, the bishops and the priests um, for the decisions that they make, for their actions, for their attitudes, and for their words. And usually the chrism isn't even dry. Usually it's within the first couple of years. All of that is coming from ego. It's all coming from pride. It's all coming from vainglory. It's all coming from um, uh, self-focus, self-centeredness. And there's not a shred of humility in it. And the more that we judge and condemn um, other jurisdictions, other priests, other bishops, and set ourselves up as the great judge of the universe, the deeper and deeper into delusion we dig ourselves. And it's a delusion of the ego. This is a very, very dangerous place to be. The Holy Fathers talk about this in some detail. You can all easily Google Isaac the Syrian on zealotry or zeal. Saint Ignatius Brianchaninov, one of the greatest of the 19th century monastic writers, wrote very extensively about this kind of animal zeal that comes not from our uh, not from an authentic spiritual zeal, um, uh, which is not about our ego, but it comes from our carnal passions, and it becomes a means of self gratification. Um, and so if somehow the idol that we have created disappoints us, um, we're lost. We fall into all sorts of anger and bitterness and acting out. And the reality is, it becomes a um, a kind of a spiritual suicide for having allowed ourselves to fall into that kind of attitude, into that kind of zealotry, which is motivated by our fleshly passions. Um, we have to be extremely careful of this. Um, there are some very basic rules in the spiritual life. Um, and while it's important to know that, um, uh, very important to know that bishops and priests sin, um, just like everybody else. Bishops and priests have to go to confession too, by the way, and should go just as often as their flock. Um, but it's also important to know that they bear a certain responsibility, um, and that they alone bear this responsibility that is not shared um, by the lay people of their flock. And that is that they will stand with the members of their flock at the throne of God at the last judgment, bearing witness before God for those who have been entrusted to them. This is an awesome, awesome thing. Um, in the book of Hebrews, it talks about how important it is to honor your spiritual leaders, and uh, make sure that they don't have to give an account for you with grief, but rather know that they too, that they have to give account for you, and not just you for yourself. Um, this is an aspect of the reality that we are saved together. To be a Christian does not mean that it's my personal relationship with Jesus. There is that. But when we're saved as the body of Christ. It's not just me and Jesus. It's not just me going to heaven. It's we are mutually responsible for each other's salvation, and for maintaining each other, and for uh, watching over each other to maintain that unity of uh, of mind and heart, and the bond of the spirit of peace. When we if we allow ourselves to be dominated by our ego, and we don't fight against our egos, I scarcely can imagine how we're going to persevere in the spiritual life. Because the spiritual life is life that is in complete denial of the ego. It's setting it aside and allowing ourselves to be transformed, allowing Christ to transform our mind and our heart and to raise us up into his likeness. But if we hold on to our opinions, if we hold on to our agendas, if we try and enforce these agendas on other people, if we try and enforce them on the church, we're in for a very sad awakening. And that's something very bitter. So this basic teaching of living life in a spirit of sobriety really means to live life in communion with God and communion with one another, putting away all of the temptations that distract us from that, so that we can live out that communion and grow in that communion, so that communion heals our souls and raises us up from immaturity to maturity, of which Saint Paul tells us that the goal is nothing short of the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. This is an awesome thing. To think that we are called to the stature of the fullness of Christ. And then look at where we are and how we're living and how we're sinning and how we're ignoring God. I think we need to be extremely mindful that God is calling us to, with a very high calling, to a much greater level of consciousness of our how we are presenting ourselves, not in an egotistical way, but are we conscious to keep ourselves, our emotions, our feelings, and especially our passions under control, so that we're not allowing ourselves these childish outbursts of temper or reactions which lead to consequences which we don't intend. So that's basically the talk I have for tonight. Could we go to the written questions? Is Kai listening?
Your Eminence, we hear you loud and clear.
Okay.
Double check with the questions. I apologize for my volume.
There we go. Okay.
Right. Do you see the questions, or?
Okay, here I do.
I can read them to you, Your Eminence, if you prefer.
Sure, why don't you?
Okay, no worries. So, Your Eminence, this comes from Proc Hor. Your Eminence, I was recently reading The Ladder of Divine Ascent, which I quote unquote, which I haven't read in quite a while, but that day I just picked it up and started reading. And it caught my eyes on the Bible verse of St. John of the Ladder applied to monasticism, Luke 6:60. That is, quote, "Let the dead bury their own dead, but you go and proclaim the kingdom of God," close quote. After reading it, I checked that gospel chapter be reading that day, and it was Luke 9, the same chapter that was quoted. Could it be a call for monasticism since I prayed that God would reveal his will for me? Or is it just me being weird?
No, I think it could very well be. Is it if it's something that you had felt before, a call towards monasticism or not? Is it something you'd been struggling with to be able to leave the world and move on to a deeper life in Christ? Those are the things that I would have to ask. But it could be God. God uses that sometimes. Saint Anthony went to church and he heard the gospel reading about the young man, and the Lord said to him, "If you wish to be perfect, go and sell all you have and give it to the poor, and you'll have treasure in heaven. And come and follow me." So he did. He did that exactly.
Your Eminence, Kai has a great question that I would actually love as well. Your Eminence, can you give us advice on how to construct an icon corner?
Well, basically, you can. It doesn't have to be a corner. It's nice, to do that. But what is important is that you have some kind of a shelf, or it could be the top of a dresser or something like that. And you put your icons there. You put a Bible there. If you can find or get yourself a small hand cross, not a priest's hand cross, but a small, like 6-inch kind of cross. You can put your incense up there, maybe a little bottle of holy water, something like that, and a candle, and it becomes a focal point for your prayer. If it's a corner, you can put icons on either side of the corner. You can have them diagonal to the corner, and then hang a lamp, an icon lamp in front of them, and maybe you want to put a little shelf beneath it. That's all possible. But many people have many different styles, and some of there's no rule about how it's done, but usually it's some kind of shelf. You can even buy corner shelves that are specially made for icon corners. Then you put up your icons, and you say your prayers, and that place becomes a great refuge of peace, because it becomes a place where you experience the presence of God. And so I would strongly encourage you to really invest some time in putting it together, so that it's something that's really beautiful. In fact, in Russian, it's often called the beautiful corner, and make that the focal point of your prayers.
Your Eminence, I'm sorry, I thought you were done.
Yeah,
it's to do with that. Just a my own follow-up question, but please continue.
No, I'm done.
It's a beautiful corner. In Russian, it's a beautiful corner, and then I might have cut off something that you were going to say.
Yeah, and so make it the focal point of your prayers. Say your morning and evening prayers there. So
now, you mentioned at the beginning about the prayer corner that it doesn't have to be a corner. If I have more space, could it be a whole room?
Sure.
Or is that?
Yeah. I had one friend who had a walk-in closet, and she converted the whole walk-in closet into her. Well, it's a little chapel, actually. So you can go big, or you can go small. It can just be one icon and and a candle or a lamp, or it can be dozens of icons, depending on.
Is there any?
Yeah.
Because of my addictive tendencies, can you go too much with your prayer corner or room, or can you go too much, or there's no such thing?
Yeah, it's you can kind of go overboard fairly easily. So get the icons of the saints that you have some special relationship with, as opposed to just all the saints that you've ever heard of that are interesting, which is hundreds, or every feast day icon. One of the things you can do is you can aim to get hand painted icons instead of mounted ones. You may start out with just paper icons and then move to ones that have been mounted on boards, and then eventually get a hand painted one, and then maybe more depending on your budget. But I've seen, and actually even the Hawaiian icon, if you're on Mother of God, that so copiously weeps myrrh, is a paper print mounted on a board.
Wow.
Yeah. And she weeps gallons of myrrh.
Oh, wow.
So it doesn't have to be some kind of great. It's not about the art itself.
Yeah, just to finish up, I promise I won't take up more of your time on this topic. I saw a great meme last night on this channel, and it was like, it wasn't the best, but I loved it. He was talking about Marvel characters. This is what people's heroes are these days, and to me, this is what a hero is. And he puts all these saints, and it kind of harkens to my vision of these days. Obviously, who my heroes are the venerated saints. There are people for me to look up to,
right,
to try to be a better Christian. So that's why the icons and the saints and my large prayer corner is so important to me, because I do need always someone to look up to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I myself.
I
myself have essentially put together a small chapel.
Nice.
Where eventually I would serve liturgy. So.
It's amazing.
Yeah, but I can do that. I'm a bishop, so.
Of course. Yeah, I'd sure appreciate if you posted that in whatever website or social media you have. That would be amazing for me to see. I personally would love that.
Okay. Well, actually, it's on my Facebook account.
Okay, I'll go stalk you on Facebook. Matt the Lesser asks, Your Eminence, how strictly must Wednesday and Friday fast be observed during prayer? Should you be reciting word for word, for example, in the Lord's Prayer, using trespassers instead of debtors? Also, sorry, I haven't been at
the Skeet.
I don't know what that is. I apologize.
At the Skeet, the Skeet is the monastery.
I learned a new word today.
I know Matt the Lesser. Well, basically, if you fast according to the rules, it's Wednesdays and Fridays are relatively strict according to the saints of the day. So some saints, they allow fish, and sometimes they allow wine and oil, and sometimes they're really strict fasts with what's called dry eating, and in which the aspect of the actual fasting could be done, which means not eating. You have to ask your spiritual father about that. And then during prayer, should you be reciting word for word? Well, yeah, you can, and especially in the beginning, it's really good to pray the prayers as they're written, and to enter into the words of the prayer, and to let those words sink into your mind and your heart, and and then become your own words. And you can do this for the Jesus prayer. You can do this for the Lord's Prayer. You can do this for all of the prayers in the prayer book, basically. You can do them also with the prayers of the liturgy. And so then you ask about the in the Lord's Prayer using trespasses instead of debtors. In the King James version, it says, "And forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors." And this is actually a much more accurate translation than trespasses. And forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. The word in Greek and in Slavonic is the word for debtor and for debt. And so trespassers, I believe, is what comes out of the Book of Common Prayer, which is, of course, a very venerable source for English religious literature, English language religious literature. In ROCOR, we tend to use debts and debtors. The OCA, they use trespasses, and I'm not sure what they do in other jurisdictions. Actually, in ROCOR, it's we tend to do it in Slavonic anyway. So, in some places.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, Mospat, so that's what I like to keep it real. Your Eminence, the following question comes from Matthew Johnson.
Uh-huh.
Your Eminence, how does one choose a new baptismal name?
Uh-huh. Well, basically, that you look at the lives of different saints that are and then basically the best thing is to find somebody who really attracts you among the saints that you're interested in, and or whose life you want to emulate. So perhaps somebody who served the poor, like Saint Martin of Tours coming up this weekend, or Saint Basil the Great, or Saint John Chrysostom, Saint Basil, of course, was a great theologian, and one of the great fathers of monasticism. Saint John Chrysostom was a great preacher. Saint Jacob of Sitka, Saint Herman were great missionaries. Saint Innocent. So you basically get a picture of the history of the church, and find the persons who would interest you, who really interest you and attract you the most. So, and otherwise we can talk about it. I know Matthew Johnson too. So.
Thank you, Your Eminence. The following comes from Baby Otters Are Cute. Vladika, if I'm already reading Mystical Marriage by Elder Aemilianos, because my parish is doing book club on it, but I fell behind, is it okay if I switch to Unseen Warfare? Because I'm trying to desperately quit porn and masturbation.
Well, I think that's probably a really good idea. Unseen Warfare will be helpful. Also, I think reading the books by Elder Ephraim could be very helpful. And also the Ladder of Divine Ascent. But that's pretty advanced. But if you're reading Mystical Marriage by Elder Emilianos, then that's a pretty advanced book. So I would, if you're kind of a new convert, then I would probably not go to that book study. That's a little too much.
Excellent. Following comes from Lamel. Your Eminence, in an earlier lecture, you mentioned finding the right monastery before joining it. Can you shed light in what that process looks like and how one should approach it?
Okay. Well, basically, um, you go. You visit some monasteries, and you may read what the abbots have had to say. You may have heard of them. You may have friends who know them, and then you get to know them yourself, and you begin to and develop a relationship with that person. And if the abbot is somebody that you can open yourself to, that you feel completely comfortable with, and who himself also uh, uh, can, um, has the sense that you belong in that community. In other words, he recognizes you as his son. Um, that's the monastery you should join. You go to the monastery where you find your spiritual father. Um, and uh, and it's that and because that relationship is the key to um, uh, to monasticism. It's all about discipleship to a spiritual father, and that relationship is really a relationship of sonship and fatherhood. And it's a very deep, it's a very profound and intimate relationship. Of course, um, there are things you have to be completely open and tell your spiritual father everything about you, but not expect him to tell you everything about himself. You'll get to know him really well, but there is a certain one-way aspect of that relationship. But that's all right. Um, and the deeper you get to know each other, the more it develops. And also, um, if you have if you have close friends in the brotherhood, um, uh, maybe that if you have a um, uh, well, if you have a rapport with the other brothers there, then that is a really good um, that's a really good indication um, that's a monastery that you should go to. But if you go to a monastery and you know uh, you don't connect with the spiritual father and you don't connect with anybody there, and it's just kind of an institution, and you know and there's no real personal connection, that's probably not the place for you. um, so uh, and that's really what it looks like. um,
Mhm.
so
Joe asks, Your Eminence, do you have any favorite foods or dishes for the light and strict fasting periods? Are there foods you could recommend for people on a tight budget or students, perhaps? Are there foods that come to mind that are good staples for people, regardless of their cultures and locations? Your recommendations would greatly help brothers and sisters. Thank you, Joe,
well,
I guess.
I tend to go uh, to cook ethnic during the fasting periods. So in particular, Chinese kind of stir fries and um, uh, uh, Japanese foods. Chinese are really good. Um, um, I'm not a. There's a great temptation, I think, in our culture to uh, uh, overdo it on carbs um, during the fasts. And so, if you're going through a big jar of peanut butter and 3 loaves of bread a week, all you're going to do is get fat, quite frankly. And it won't, and it's not very nutritious. So you got to focus on fresh vegetables. You got to focus on simple ways. If you do if you do a stir fry and rice, that's great. Another thing is Mexican. Most, burritos are great. Just bean burritos with some salsa on a light fast day. In other words, on a fish day, have sushi or something like that. And on the strict fasting periods, well, just be more strict. Different people have different kinds of rules. There's some really good protein powders out there, and you can make smoothies. Use almond milk. Use rice milk. I don't think there's any soy boys here, so you probably don't want to use soy milk. It's not good for men anyway. But
Based.
what's that?
Based. I'm just saying how
Yeah.
right you are, Your Eminence. I am
Okay.
so impressed.
Yeah. It's we don't we don't need estrogen flowing through our veins. But
That's right.
so but you can make fresh fruit, and you can there's vegetarian soy powders. Pea protein stuff is good. So that's what I would encourage. I don't encourage the heavy starch route. So
I find it interesting because you're from San Diego. You mentioned the Mexican food. Before the Spaniards came, it's this amazing vegetarian food that would be perfect for fasting, for Orthodox fasting.
Oh yeah.
And you bring in the European fusion, and it becomes the most unhealthy food on the planet.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
still the best though.
Oh, but in San Diego, the fish tacos, those are great for fast days.
I would go to Ensenada. They're so good.
Yeah.
Have you tried them over there, Your Eminence? In Ensenada? That's where the fish tacos are originally from.
I know Ensenada very well, and
I know you do.
and all the and most everything between it and San Diego. So,
Oh, would you? Now it's on my own personal thing. Have you been to Puerto Nuevo, which is a lobster village? Because that would be excellent for a fasting, right? Because it's lobster. Lobster is you can eat lobster, right? During fasting.
Lobster's kosher for us for fasting. Lobster, shrimp, crab, squid in particular is really good.
Nice.
And
Beautiful.
of course, we have to remember that the Germans developed beer to drink during Lent. So
wasn't aware of that, but that's I love beer. Kai has, I might be biased, or accused of being biased, but Kai has the best questions today. I think we're very similar in a lot of ways. Your Eminence, who are some saints that noticeably struggled with anger and short-temperedness?
Well, that's a good question. Well, Saint Cyril of Alexandria was one.
I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
I was thinking about his life, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure who else, actually.
Saint Moses, the Black?
Moses.
He's a good example.
Yeah, well, and he overcame that. And, I mean, a lot of people struggle with anger and short-temperedness. And, most young men think that the biggest challenge in a monastery is lust. It's not at all. It's anger. And so people have to deal with that. And that comes out in short-temperedness. Of course, if you're fasting, you're hungry. Of course, a lot of young men, they can't fast too intensely. Otherwise, they just fall over. And I've seen that. Literally, they just fall over in the middle of church. It's like no good. Um, so,
Right.
yeah, I don't. I'm sure there are particular stories in the both in the latter as well as in uh, the conferences of Saint John Cassian, which is an
Hmm.
outstanding source to because it's those are long interviews with the Desert Fathers.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, to me, I'm letting it linger a bit more on your answer because I personally am quite interested in these subjects because I struggle as well. Well, I'm not saying Kai does, I do,
Uh-huh.
but I struggle with these things. So I've always, like, I found a lot of, well, as I was reading, I was trying to read, starting to read the Brill book on St. Cyril of Alexandria.
Uh-huh.
And just reading the biography, you learn so much about Saint Cyril and put things into perspective.
Oh yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
he was quite remarkable.
Hmm, hmm.
He was also a very shall we say difficult character.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I empathize with him. You know. Anyway, I'll move on. Pano Kosturos asked, Your Eminence, is there a particular prayer routine you would recommend prior to and after confession? Thank you.
Well, there are some really uh, good, prayers of preparation for confession. Um, but I tend to like to emphasize, at least for myself, um, uh, the Jesus prayer. The Jesus prayer is my main rule, personally. Um, Although though of course still use the other prayers. Um, there's also probably the best prayer book that I know of is the Old Believer prayer book from Erie, Pennsylvania. Um, it has some really outstanding um, uh, prayers in it that are not found in other in our contemporary prayer books. It's because it's a 17th century monastic prayer book. Um, the prayers are more intense, and they tend to be a little more uh, mm, explicit in some of the things that they mention. As for example, in their I hate to call it a sample confession, but it's they provide a kind of a format of confession. And there are things in there that like hadn't really thought about. And some of it I would rather not. Um, uh, but what it does is it hits you and the depth of some of those prayers really convict you. There's another prayer rule that I find to be incredibly valuable, which is the prayers of Saint Isaac the Syrian. Um, and my old monastery, St. John's Monastery in Manton, published that a number of years ago. And I think it's still printing it. And what it is, it's chapter 5 of the second volume of the works of St. Isaac the Syrian, which is basically a prayer rule, a set of prayers. It's quite long. So, I what I would do is I would do half of it in the morning and half in the evening. Um, and and what it does is it takes you much more deeply within yourself. And from that perspective, you're able to see more clearly um, what what you need to confess and how you need to confess it. It doesn't give words for it um, so much as it really transports you to that very deep place.
Thank you, Eminence. Dusty asks, Vladika, I am dealing with an alcoholic. It seems my awareness of the disease and evidence of blackout drunkenness has increased since my spiritual inquiries started. Is there such a thing in Orthodoxy as spiritual attacks? What, if anything, can I do about it?
Well, this is a very, very serious thing. And if you're referring to yourself, I think one of the things you need to do is you need to bring it to confession. I would also strongly urge going to AA and getting a sponsor and working through the 12 steps. The 12 steps are based on actually the ancient fathers, and so there's a lot of extremely good material. But then you don't just do the 12 steps with your sponsor. You also work through them and bring that same material to confession, because the 12 steps are good, but they can't give absolution. The awareness of the disease and evidence of blackout drunkenness, that's really serious stuff. What it means is your body can no longer process alcohol in a normal way, and it's switched over to being alcoholic. And so it's imperative that you renounce alcohol. Period. If you're dealing with somebody who is alcoholic, then there is AA has a sister organization. One is adult, a couple of them. One is Adult Children of Alcoholics, and the other is Codependents Anonymous. And those are, they, on one hand, you can say, oh, they use pop psychology and all of that. But quite frankly, they work. And I know, and I've known some people who have, having gone through that, have achieved a very, very profound degree of spiritual maturity. There certainly are spiritual attacks in Orthodoxy. We have a very highly developed understanding of the spiritual life. And unfortunately, one of the things that happens when you start pursuing Christ and you start trying to turn your life around is that you're going to be attacked spiritually. And what does this look like? There's all sorts of different ways. It can be anything from everything seeming to go right and being in a bad mood and and wanting to kick the cat and and hit the wall and all of that kind of nonsense, or it can be something really. It can be, you can have outright demonic attacks, outright demonic experiences, which can be very, very scary. Very common ones are waking up in the middle of the night, and it feels like you have something, usually a demon, sitting on your chest, and you can't breathe. It can be awareness of the presence of demons, all sorts of things. And so what you do with that is that you get up, you make the sign of the cross, and you ask, and then say the Jesus prayer for a while, or you say, say some other prayers. Make the sign of the cross over your bed, and then go back to sleep. Of course, you're probably pretty disturbed after that. Demonic attacks can also come um, uh, in the form of being assaulted by thoughts. They can be. It can be being assaulted by sexual feelings and urges. Um, there's a thousand ways that the demons, who have had lots of practice over the course of the millennia, to know how to tempt people. Um, but uh, but dealing with the alcoholism, that is imperative, and so I really want to encourage you to do that. So
Excellent, excellent. Just wanted to bring back a little feedback from the last time. Lamel, who asked you about the monastery and choosing, goes, "Thank you, Vladika," and based.
uh-huh.
So for the young ones, you should start learning that word in case
I
you
have.
didn't know it, Your Eminence.
It
Beautiful.
just didn't occur to me. That's not what I usually
Right.
think about based as meaning.
Well, you are based. I think one of the reasons you're so popular on this server is because you are based. So yeah.
Okay.
Dan also asks, Your Eminence, in regards to Christ's second commandment, who is our neighbor? Whom should we love like we love ourselves?
Everyone. It's simply everyone. You know, to love does not necessarily is not the emotion of attraction. In this case, love is a spiritual acceptance of the other, and someone for whom we can have compassion, someone for whom we can um, have a you know someone whom we can show mercy on. And so it basically is everyone that we encounter. Um, I don't know how better to answer that.
Right, right. Your Eminence, personally, can I add to that as a question? I was reading St. Augustine, I think it was St. Augustine, he was saying, quoting the part of the Bible where it goes, hate the iniquity in man, not the creation.
Exactly.
Um, yeah, so could you, I didn't add because I would never come here to add anything. Could you shed some light on that for me, or your feelings on that, your opinion on that, just so I can
Well,
gain a bit more wisdom
well,
in regards to that?
I think the modern version of it is love the sinner and hate the sin. You know, um, uh, we if we condemn people for their sins, all we're doing is condemning ourselves, not only for our own sins but as a hypocrite. And so that I think is I think is a basic thing in the spiritual life. Um, so we have to try and be patient. We have to be kind. We have to be condescending. We have in a positive way. Condescending to the weakness of others, and not judge them, and not uh, not slander them, um, but look out for their good and how to build them up.
I think that's an excellent segue to Maverick Zero's very pertinent question these days. Your Eminence, how do we help Roman Catholic friends or family of Roman Catholic friends who may be going through a crisis of faith in light of recent events?
Invite them to the Orthodox Church. I think is the best way. And I think, certainly the Orthodox Church is not perfect, but as Bishop Basil Rodzianko said to somebody, always remember the Church is divine and the Church is human, and never confuse the two. Um, I think we can point out if they're open to it, that all these, some of these more recent events certainly points out that the Roman Catholic Church is fallible, and that the Pope is fallible, uh, and so all of the kind of idea of his infallibility is really a lie. It's a lie. And so the whole power structure, the whole the authority structure. Now we also have an authority structure. We have a hierarchy in the Orthodox Church, because and the Roman Catholic Church, basically took our hierarchical structure, and well, let's put it this way: they developed it. We would say they developed it falsely. But I would say to Roman Catholics who are looking, especially that they should look at Orthodoxy and see what the original form of Catholicism is, because that's what we are. We are the original Catholic Church. We are the one holy Catholic Church itself. And instead of Roman Catholicism, we are Orthodox Catholicism, and have retained, as far as possible and to the greatest extent, the apostolic faith and the apostolic tradition, unchanged. So
Interesting.
yeah, there's a lot of people out there who are very demoralized, very disappointed at at how the Roman Catholic Church has developed, shall we say, over the past few decades.
Your Eminence, before I was Orthodox recently, I wasn't I had a weird sense of looking at things. Is it wrong of me to have glee with Pope Francis, what he does, and just exposes what a heretical fake church it is?
It doesn't help.
Is it wrong?
Yes,
it doesn't help. Yeah,
it's wrong.
No.
Ultimately,
well, it's not glee. I look at it more from the perspective that they're just bringing more people to Orthodoxy potentially. How do you see my vision of that? It's wrong, right?
Well,
I should stop that.
Well, it's probably not right to rejoice in other people's suffering.
Okay.
Or sins. On the other hand, I have to say, well, I'm very pleased that they're sending more people to Orthodoxy. So myself. So
we have a running joke in the server that Pope Francis is the best Orthodox apologist of all time, and we thank him dearly for his apologetic work for the church. Thanks.
Lord have mercy.
Because I see a lot. No, Lord have mercy. I see a lot of people like get angry with what he does, and I'm so happy every time he does it, and I have joy. But it's not glee. It's like you're just bringing people to us. I really see it from that perspective. So, yeah. Anyway, Dragoon asked, Vladika, I have heard Father Cosmas, who has Orthodox talks on YouTube, say that men who have watched pornography since childhood, 11 years old or so, are almost irredeemable in how they can view women and relationships. I fell into this camp, and I've already asked my spiritual father about it, but said to give him a bit to pray and respond. I was wondering what exhortation you might give to someone afflicted in this way. I won't give up, and I plan to pick up Unseen Warfare tomorrow from the parish library, but I can't help but want to ask you for some advice.
Well, and your name is Luke, and I will be praying for you.
His name is Luke. Oh, you got it. Okay. Yeah, I just thought it was a little self-serving that he wants to pray, but it's fine.
Hey,
so
that's fine. Nobody is irredeemable. Now, that does not mean that you may not have damaged yourself psychologically and even physically by such indulgence in porn and masturbation. Um, you know, I've had young guys confess that um, they've become impotent without porn, and it, by 18 years old, and that's really bad. That's really bad. Um, so, but that doesn't mean that that it's irredeemable. One of the things that you absolutely need to do is to cut it off. Uh, not your members, that is, but to cut off the porn, absolutely, and and to cut up and to cut down and eliminate eventually the masturbation. It's maybe not, maybe you can't do it uh, just in one fell swoop, but I would certainly, but certainly you can stop the porn, and you can you can prevent your computer even um, from being able to access those sites. Um, uh, but but the real issue, of course, is the masturbation. Uh, the, and basically, it's an act of will. It's an act of will. And having an accountability partner, confessing it regularly to your priest, um, uh, and and keep on struggling. Um, and I think you'll find the same advice in Unseen Warfare. Um, you'll find it throughout the ascetic literature. Now, is that going to repair um, how you perceive women and relationships? No. Of course, Unseen Warfare and all of the other books on the ascetic life are all about monasticism, and they're quite frankly not interested in repairing relationships with women. um, it's all about encouraging men to become monks, um, which is a good thing, which is a great thing, and uh, so that is something certainly um, open to you, but you need to make sure that you're making some progress on um, uh, self control. Um, but the thing is, don't lose hope. Keep praying. Keep no matter how many times you fall, get up, and you fall. If you fall, get up, dust yourself off, and keep going. Um, uh, Pray the prayers for purity. Um, but one of the things that I think is really a couple of things that I've found that are very helpful in dealing with lustful passions. Number one, remember that sex is not about pleasure. Sex is about having children. Um, if you keep it, uh, if you remember that sex is all about begetting children, um, this should help because most likely you probably don't want to have that many children. Um, you you and you probably want to you know uh, uh, and marriage also, quite frankly, is about having children. Um, the other thing that's really important is don't obsess about it. Um, uh, the, when I was a priest, well, I was very bad, and because I lifted the penance several times from young guys who had been uh, given given a penance by some over enthusiastic spiritual father, who would say, one kid came to me. He hadn't been to communion in 3 years, um, and his spiritual or his this priest he'd gone to for confession had given him a 3-week penance for masturbation. Well, he couldn't go 3 weeks, and what it did was it completely focused him on masturbation as the sole criterion of his spiritual life. There's a lot more to spiritual life than whether you're jerking off or not. Infinitely more. And so that completely backfired when that priest did that. And he probably didn't even know, because he probably didn't even know this kid in a personal way and have any kind of actual pastoral relationship with him. So if you find yourself thinking about it, stop it. Think about something else. Get up, go for a walk, go read a book, turn the channel, change the channel. Stop that line of thought. And the more that you can begin to control how you to control your thoughts, and this is totally possible, the more you can learn how to stop certain kinds of tempting thoughts, the more and more control over the rest of your behavior that you'll have. And so basically, you'll find this kind of advice in the Philokalia. You'll find it in the Ladder. You'll find it in John Cassian. You'll find it all over the patristic corpus, because really the essence of the spiritual battle is about the battle with thoughts. So I don't know what else I can say.
I think you said a mouthful, Your Eminence. Your Eminence, just because he's pinging me so much, Mr. Monkey wanted to thank you so much
My
for
job.
sorry, I have a bad echo. I apologize. I'll just talk through it in case it's His Eminence. Your Eminence, I want to thank you for your advice last time. I do not have the ability to attend an Orthodox church. I was raised Baptist and attend a Baptist church. I have not converted to Orthodoxy, but see that as a large possibility in my future. I understand Orthodoxy teaches that Protestantism is heretical. Is it wrong to attend my Baptist church, or should I continue attending until I am able to attend an Orthodox church? Also, what will happen to the wonderful people who know nothing of Orthodoxy at my Baptist church? Will I see the faithful ones in the resurrection?
Jesus Christ died for all of humanity, and every human being who's ever been born will be resurrected. This is a dogma of the Orthodox Church. So everyone will be resurrected, and we have to hope that that God will have mercy on them and save them, as we hope that He has mercy on us and saves us. We cannot judge other people, and people will be judged according to their conscience, as will we. Yes, Protestantism is heretical. It's very problematic. It's got all sorts of strange doctrines and strange kinds of mutations of the faith, and and God only knows, because each Protestant pastor is essentially a little pope. It's probably better to go to church than not go to church. But what I would do is I would see how, as soon as possible, you can go to an Orthodox church, and pray for those people that that you know at that Baptist church. Love them. Love them into the kingdom of God. And maybe they'll also find the fullness of the Orthodox faith. So,
Your Eminence, would you like to switch to voice chat, or
Sure.
would you like to answer a few more questions? Here?
well, let's answer some more questions, and then we can switch to voice chat.
Okay. No worries. Let's see here. This is from Good Faith. Your Eminence, in my catechesis, there is this week, I asked my priest if there was an official position. This comes from Good Faith. If there was an official position on the young earth versus old earth theories. He said, quote, "It is a mixed bag," close quote. I found it surprising that the church wouldn't have an official position on such a topic. What is your position on the topic?
My position is that the dogma of the church is that God created the heavens and the earth.
Based.
And as he said to Job, where were you when I created the heavens and the earth? We can't know. Nobody was there. Nobody was, there to record it. We only have theories and ideas, and some of them are well based, and some of them are not. Many of the fathers had, they only had the science of their time. We have the science of our time. The church does not enter into that particular debate. Now, there are some people that do, and on both sides. But the church has a category of theological questions called theologumena. And basically what it means is theological opinions. And most of these are opinions about things that have not been revealed. How God created the heavens and the earth, how old it is, and all of this kind of stuff, we don't know. We can't know. God didn't reveal it. So it's up to us and our own science and our own understanding to approach that as best as we can. And so I have a story about that. I have a friend, a godson now, who recently converted. He walked into one of my classes in Washington, D.C., introduced himself, and that he was a grad student, a doctoral student in evolutionary biology. But he walked into the class toting a volume of Father Seraphim Rose's book on Genesis. That, which was pretty wild, I have to say. He has since converted to Orthodoxy.
Wow.
Yeah. And so it's we have to be very, very careful to understand what are the positions of the church and the areas where the church allows speculation. And this is one of them.
Rune asks, I apologize, I see he might be putting words in your mouth. Some people do that, but I'll read it. Vladika, you mentioned how unseen warfare in the books from Elder Ephraim were towards getting people to become monastics and don't offer much advice for fixing human relationships. My priest recommended St. John Chrysostom's on marriage and family life. Do you think this plus daily New Testament reading can serve this purpose? Thank you again so much for your advice and prayers.
Well, I think that's actually probably a very good, very good piece of advice. And I would read that, and I would uh, uh, take a look. Take a look on at ancient faith, at the books that they have on relationships. Um, there's some very good material that's been put out recently. Um, I can't cite it offhand, but it's um, but I know the people there, and they're good people, and much of the stuff that they put out is very valuable. So, um,
Good.
and by the way, I
Hey,
took no offense.
Yes.
I took
No,
no
please.
offense.
You're good.
Yeah. So,
Sorry, I missed that. It might have been relevant.
okay,
Could you repeat that, Jeremy?
just to Dragoon, I took no offense. And he apologizes as if.
Oh, right. I'm seeing it right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I'm very hypersensitive with these things. So, but I think for the most part, I have a good nose. It's just, I always get uncomfortable when someone restates my own position,
Yeah.
and it might not come out the right way. So, and then it's kind of like my past relationships with women if I could trace the history, it's constant restatement of my own position that is skewed. So that's why I was just trying to be like cautious there. I'm being protective. Ajax asked, Your Eminence, I live in an urban area and I am pursuing a vocation that will involve much time spent using computers, typing, being in front of a screen, etc. I sometimes feel conflicted that this lifestyle is, quote, not doing it right, unquote, or that being a Christian requires labor that is more strenuous. In other aspects of my life, I plan to be more active. I am asking for guidance if I should adjust my priorities or if it is possible to appropriately serve God in a profession that requires constant use of digital gadgets. This is from Ajax.
Well, I think we can serve God in a multitude of ways. Uh, certainly in the New Testament, we're advised to work quietly with our hands. I guess manipulating a digital gadget is working quietly with our hands and our mind, and uh, and that's good, but then I would suggest maybe at home, um, have a garden or something like that where you can be in touch with the earth and where you can be in touch with the creation, um, so that you're not, and get a dog or something like that, where you can have uh, again be in touch, in literally in touch with the creation. Um, That's it, and it's a beautiful thing, and it's a great relief from um, the whole kind of pattern of dealing with um, digital gadgets, as you call them. So
Mm. I was watching Your Eminence. By the way, we'll be switching soon. Kai said that
That's
one
fine.
more question and we'll end the live stream and switch to private VC discussion. So I'll probably read the last message if that's okay, Your Eminence.
Sure.
Cool. So Joe asks, Your Eminence, this question may be unrelated to catechesis, but how do lay people go about getting original Orthodox theological or philosophical books published? How much the material is peer reviewed, proofread, and discussed among church authorities or other academics? Some of these lay writers have seminary backgrounds, like Dr. Yaroslav Pelikan. But is it possible without a background? Thank you.
Well,
That's from Ajax. From
sure,
Joe, I'm
from
sorry.
Joe. Well, it is possible without a theological background. But what I would do is have some people review it before you publish it, and and get their opinion and see, and they should be, um, and make sure that you let them know that you want them to be absolutely brutally honest, um, and whether or not this particular piece will be valuable and worthwhile or not. So when it depends on which publisher. If you go with a more academic publisher like St. Vladimir's or Holy Cross, much less one of the university publishers, there is some review that does go on. There's an editor that's assigned to you and to your work. With some of the other publishers that are not so academic, like Ancient Faith or something, Light and Life. Ancient Faith does a good job trying, and some of their editors are, I mean, they're very good and have a lot of experience. So I would really consider that. You have to find the right niche for the book. It depends on what it is and who would publish it. It depends on the particular niche of the publisher and who the audience is. And then there's Amazon, where you can publish it yourself. So, all right. But yes, you can publish, by the way, without a seminary background. So are we going to switch over?
Your Eminence, yes, I think Kai should be switching us soon to the other channel. So
Yeah. So before we start, Your Eminence, if we could just do the...
Probably Kai will be saying for us to go to the channel down. So if you guys would politely go down, and if I messed up, Kai will correct me right now.
Yeah. So Your Eminence, they can't hear me just because I'm not in the voice chat. But if you wanted to do the closing prayers, and then we'll switch over, Your Eminence.
Great.
Thanks.
Okay. It is truly me to bless thee, O Theotokos, ever blessed and most pure, and the mother of our God, more honorable than the cherubim, more glorious beyond compare than the seraphim. Without corruption thou gavest birth to God the Word. True Theotokos, we magnify thee. The blessing of the Lord be upon you through his grace and love for mankind, always now and ever and into ages of ages. Amen. All right. So are we switched over?
I can hear you, Your Eminence.
Okay.
So let me give you a... So what I'm saying is, they will switch you over in a minute, Your Eminence.
Okay.